anybody can put anything out there. And so you truly don't know for sure if a canning recipe that somebody puts out there has been tested. What kind of research did they put into it? Or if they're actually copying it from somebody else, did they cite a source? That's a thing to look for. So be very careful. That's why I've tried to put sources on my website.
In addition to eating homegrown fruits and vegetables in season, gardeners can take steps to preserve some for later. However, food preservation is a science, and it must be done correctly to prevent microorganisms from re-contaminating the food. On today's Sound Living, Food Preservation Safety. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. Karen Blakeslee, a K-State Research and Extension food scientist and coordinator of the K-State Rapid Response Center, covers the basic steps for safely preserving food. Karen, probably one of the things you get the most questions about is home canning safety, and there are a lot of things that go into making home canning safe.
Absolutely. The process of doing food preservation is a true science, and there is a lot of science that goes into this. So, you can make a mixture of salsa, for example, and it is your favorite recipe that you make. You can eat that fresh, just like it is. You can freeze it, and that would be a safe option. But if you want to can that mixture, that creates a whole different science experiment. And it's because you're putting it inside of a jar and pulling a vacuum on it, and you're pulling the air out of that jar. And that just creates a whole different environment for that product to be living in. So there's a lot of science that goes into that. And one thing that we talk about a lot, and I know it sounds like we're saying it over and over, is start out with good tested recipes. And what I mean by that is use recipes that either come through extension. Those are typically based on the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. I'm also good with using recipes from the Ball Blue Book. Now, I know we're not supposed to talk about brand names, but they do really work with extension to make sure that the research they're doing is along with what we're doing too. So they're very invested in what we are saying, what we are doing, and vice versa. So those kinds of resources. And one thing I've tried to do over the years through my website is put a lot of resources out there for people to go to show that these are good places to go for recipes. I tell people when I do home food preservation classes, I say, if you start with a bad recipe, it's still going to be a bad recipe, So, and it may be perfectly fine with, eating it fresh. But again, with canning it, that changes a lot of different factors.
And I think I saw somewhere that the recipe should be from after 1994.
Yeah, well, back then, the USDA did a really major overhaul of what their recommendations were, what their recipes were. They changed a lot of things, and there's been some changes since then, but that was really a major change back then. I can't remember everything, but, that just know that older recipes may not be safe recipes. Even if you have recipes that have been passed down through the family, there's a possibility that they still might be okay. Compare them to a recipe of today. Make sure it's exactly what today's recipe says, and you'll probably be just fine. So I caution people about using old recipe books, even from the Ball Blue Book. Those old recipe books, they've changed them and they update them. So be very careful about that. And the other thing is the internet is a great resource for a lot of things. It's also a great resource for some very bad things. And that includes recipes. And
most of those recipes are not research-based.
Exactly. I mean, anybody can put anything out there. And so you truly don't know for sure if a canning recipe that somebody puts out there has been tested. What kind of research did they put into it? Or if they're actually copying it from somebody else, did they cite a source? That's a thing to look for. So be very careful. That's why I've tried to put sources on my website.
You mentioned that this is a science, and is that because we're storing this? It's got to have that shelf life? Is that where that comes into play?
Well, yes, that's part of it. It's also, as I mentioned earlier, it's pulling a vacuum on those jars and taking the air out of the jars. And that creates an environment for some bacteria to grow. For example, botulism is one that likes to grow in an environment where there's no air. But if you've processed the food properly and the other parameters are safe, then it's going to take care of any botulism that might be there. Temperature is really important. Using the correct processing methods, such as water bath canning for high acid foods or pressure canning for low acid foods, that's critical. The temperature is so important. Botulism doesn't like to grow in a high-acid food environment, such as in fruits or jams or jellies. The acidity is too high, or actually the pH is low, but it's a high-acid environment, and botulism doesn't like that. So those types of foods can be processed in a water bath canner, so we get the temperature to 212, okay, the boiling water temperature. But for low-acid foods, such as plain green beans or corn or potatoes or meat, those must be pressure canned because they are a low-acid food, and they can support the growth of botulism. But if we pressure can them and get the temperature up to 240, then we take care of the botulism that might be there. So that's part of it, the acidity. There's also water activity, the moisture content in food. It also depends on the size of the food pieces, how thick or thin the product is. There's a whole range of factors. So it may sound like it's a simple thing to just throw it in the jar and can it. It's not.
And even what side of the state you live on.
Absolutely. Kansas is not flat. Contrary to popular belief, it may look like it's flat, but it's not. Eastern Kansas is below 1,000 feet, but you go out to western Kansas and it's close to 4,000 feet. So as you go up in elevation, the boiling point of water goes down. And so when we process these jars of food, we have to adjust our processing to compensate for that altitude difference. Anybody who lives above 1,000 feet, you're probably going to have to change a processing method. In pressure canning, we increase pressure. In water bath canning, you increase the time. And good recipe sources will tell you how to do that. And so you have to do your homework on that.
In terms of the canning itself, we've kind of talked a little bit about, getting ready to do the canning. We're starting with new lids. We're starting with extremely clean jars. We've got to start with something that's pretty sterile to begin with.
Exactly. I mean, you need to use good food handling practices. Start off with washing your hands. That's the first most important thing in any cooking environment. So wash your hands, use good clean jars. The jars can be reused from year to year as long as they're still in good condition. There's no chips, cracks, scratches, things like that. Always wash them before you use them. The lids, we use the lid and ring apparatus that screws onto the jar. Those lids can only be used once. Now, today's lids that you find in the grocery stores are made a little differently than they used to be. And the company, the Ball Company, has said that you do not have to preheat those lids like we used to soften the sealing compound. We don't have to do that anymore. The main thing is to wash them, whether they're on jars when you buy them or out of the little boxes. If you do want to heat them, just put them into some hot simmering water. Don't boil them. Boiling them will soften that sealing compound too much, and then they may not seal right at all. The lids are really the only thing you have to buy new every year. Everything else can be reused. The jars, the canners, take good care of those. Do some maintenance on those if you have to. If you have a dial gauge canner, get your gauge tested. Extension offices across the state can help you with that. And there's certain brands that we can test. That's Presto, National, Maid of Honor, and Magic Seal. Those are the 4 brands that we can test. Check your seals, your rubber gaskets, make sure they're in good condition. Keeping up maintenance on it. And those things can last a really long time.
How important is the headspace?
Headspace is important to get a good vacuum on a product in a jar. And it's different by different types of products. They're different because foods move around in the jars a little differently. And so some need a little more space to move around during the processing. So in general, jams and jellies need 1/4 inch of headspace, and that's the distance between the top edge of the jar and top of the food and liquid. So 1/4 inch for jams and jellies. For fruits, pickles, and most tomato products, it's 1/2 inch. And then for plain vegetables, such as green beans, corn, carrots, things like that, 1 inch headspace. And then meats and poultry are at least 1 inch. There are some that might be 1.25 inches. An exception to the fruit category is pie filling. Pie filling needs 1 inch of headspace. Those are the general rules. And again, good recipes will tell you how much headspace you need.
If we're not freezing what we've canned, what are we doing in terms of moving things from one shelf to another and making sure that we get it eaten before it goes bad?
Well, one of the easiest things to do is put a date on the jar, on the lid. And actually, what the lid manufacturers have done now, they put a actual line on that lid to remind you to put a date on that lid. We recommend using your home canned products within a year for best safety and best quality. Things do change over time. Theoretically, they could probably last 18 months or so, but use it. You've gone to a lot of work, use these products. But also not only look at the date, but always visually take an overview. When you pull that jar off the shelf, what does it look like? Does it still look like it did when you canned it? Always double check the lid, make sure it's still sealed good. That is important. That's the last thing I think about. But look at color changes, any bubbles moving inside the jars on their own. There's something fermenting if that happens. Look for any kind of off odors when you open up the lid. That's a sign that something's going wrong. The primary thing is please don't taste it. If you notice anything, you see something, smell something that doesn't look right at all, do not taste it, because even one little pinky dip is what I call it. Taking your little finger and dipping it in there and then licking that can really make you sick. It doesn't take much.
They used to have cellars. Where are we primarily finding people storing their foods now?
Yeah, a lot of people still have cellars. And what we recommend is cool, dry, and dark, because the light can cause color changes. So you want to keep it in a dark location. Temperature, it's best around 70 degrees, somewhere around there, 60, 70 degrees, so nice and cool. Because if you put it out in the garage or you put it by your water heater or your clothes dryer or somewhere where there's heat or by the furnace, that heat can cause changes in your canned foods. So somewhere cool, dry, and dark.
And like you say, put that date on there so you know that, and move the stuff from the back to the front as you're storing the new stuff?
Yeah, that's what we call FIFO, first in, first out. The other thing it helps with is for those that are cleaning out houses from family members that have passed on or moved on, and they're finding things in cabinets, and if there's no date on there or not even a description of what it is, you don't know when it was made, how it was made. The best thing to do is to throw it out.
And you have a lot of information on your website. How can they get to that website?
Yes, my Rapid Response Center website. The website address is www.rrc.ksu.edu. And then on the left-hand side, you can see a link to food preservation, and that will enter the world of everything that I've put on that website.
And subscribe for your newsletters, because those are valuable throughout the year.
Yeah, well, follow me on Facebook. My Facebook handle is at KSRE Foodie. Same thing with Twitter, because I put out a lot of information, especially on Facebook, and it flows into Twitter. Both of them are KSRE Foodie. So follow me on that. And my newsletters are all on my website. It's called You Asked It. It comes in an e-newsletter format or just a PDF you can download. So lots of information in there, too. And we also have a food preservation newsletter that we do jointly with the University of Missouri. And that comes out every 2 months. And so the September-October issue is out now. So that's also on that website.
That's Karen Blakeslee, a K-State Research and Extension food scientist and coordinator of the K-State Rapid Response Center. Again, for more information, go to www.rrc.ksu.edu and click on the link for food preservation. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.